Hi, I'm Poole, and I'm going to show you just how easy it is to make bias with SewEasy's range of bias makers. Now they range in size. We've got the smallest one, which is 6mm, that's your 1/4 inch. We've got 9mm, 3/8 of an inch, 12mm, which is your 1/2 inch, and the 18mm, and that's close to 1 inch. Now there are so many uses for bias, and I can just show you here with some of my samples. I've used it in Celtic work, so I've used the 12mm one for the Celtic work here. You can use your 1/4 inch one here to do some lovely lead light work. Also looks great on your modern design, so I've used the wider one here for the tramming between the blocks, and I've used the 1/2 inch one here also. Fantastic for clothing. So on this little girl's dress here, I've just bound the edges there. So very nice to be able to make up your bias, and you just stitch it on one side and turn it over and then machine sew that down. Great for neck edges also, like on this little garment here, and then I've also put a little bit of bias across the top of the pocket there. So it really is endless, the different ways that you can use bias. And SewEasy also make the Fusible Tape, and that is great to iron your bias on to your quilts or your designs before you stitch them on. So now I'm going to show you how you use it. So to cut bias, start with your required amount of fabric. Now most patterns will tell you how much fabric to buy, and just cut it so that it's nice and square. So using your mat and your rotary cutter and your ruler, just make sure it's nice and square there and square on that side there. Then open out your fabric and fold your corner over to make a triangle like that. Now just to explain a little bit about the grain of your fabric, your straight grain is actually the selvage edge, so it runs parallel with the selvage. Now there's not a lot of stretch in the downways grain. This is your crossways grain, so across the fabric, and you'll see that that has got a little bit of give there. But it's not until you cut your fabric on the bias grain that you really do get a little bit of stretch there, and that's how you can make your nice curved edges and your stems there. So fold over to make your triangle like that, open it out, and in that crease there we're going to cut that open. So just using your ruler there and your rotary cutter, cut the crease open. There we are. Now you can use this triangle piece to cut your bias from, but you'll notice as you cut that and you continue cutting, those strips are going to get shorter. So I'm going to work on the bigger piece here, and I'll show you how you do that. So what you're going to do is you're going to need to turn your fabric around. Now keep in mind this is if you're a right-handed person, and we're going to need to put that bias edge on a straight line of the board. Now that's quite a long distance to cut, so to make that a little bit easier, if you fold that up like that, once again place it on a line, so you've got a line going up and your folded edge on a line across the bottom there. It's just going to mean that you've got a shorter distance to cut. Now, when you're cutting bias strips, you basically just make sure that your strip is going to be twice the size of your bias maker. So if your bias maker, if you're working on the 1/2 inch one, which is the 12mm, you want to cut strips that are 1 inch wide or 24mm wide. So I'm just going to cut some 1 inch wide strips. So lining up my 1 inch line there on the edge of the fabric and just cutting along like that. Then as you continue cutting, you'll notice that you'll need to fold your fabric up again. Always close your blade there when you put it down. So you can see here, I'm just going to fold that up again there, like that. And you can continue cutting strips all the way across that piece of fabric there, and you'll end up with some nice long strips. Now those strips, if necessary for your design, you can actually join them together. But for what I'm going to show you now, we're actually just need long strips without joining them, because all of your raw ends are going to be tucked underneath another piece of bias at an intersection. So now I'll go on to showing you how to make up your bias and how to iron it onto your fabric. To make bias, what you do is you thread your strip through your bias maker. Now the first one I'm going to show you is the 1/4 inch bias maker. And I will also just make the point of, when you're going to make bias, cut one strip first and test it, because different weight fabrics may require the strip to be cut slightly a different size. Like say for instance a lighter fabric, you'll need to cut your strip a little bit wider. So here I'm using the 6mm bias maker and I've cut my strips 12mm wide. Now you thread the right side through the bias maker, and the right side is actually facing the number there. So you just push that through. Now you've got a little gap at the top there where you can just slide your strip through like that. And just my little tip is, when I make 1/4 inch bias, and this is just the 1/4 inch one, I like to work with the right side of the fabric facing up. So as I go along like that, the bias maker is tilted up on an angle, so that's about 45 degrees there that it's tilted up, and I've got the iron going directly after. It's just going along like that. Work slowly, and when you get to the end, just hold the iron down for an extra 30 seconds or so, and then bring that up. And I'll just show you on this side here. You can see how the edges of the bias are perfectly meeting on the wrong side of your bias strip. Now these bias makers, you can use these using fusible tape. There's a channel there for the fusible tape, or you do have the choice, you can just make it up like I have and then iron tape onto it if you want to. So just depending on how you're going to use your bias. Now the next one I'm going to show you is the 18mm wide bias maker. So I've got my strip again here, and this time I'm actually going to use the fusible tape with it. So same thing again, thread your strip through with the right side facing up, so facing your number there, and use your pin to help slide that through. Like that. Again, turn it over to the wrong side, and you just want to make sure that first of all you've got your raw edges meeting in the center. Then I'm going to slip through the channel there, the fusible tape. Now it is handy to actually cut your tape on that angle like that, and that will just help you to be able to thread that through. So that goes through there, and then it goes through here. Sometimes it's a little bit of a fiddle to get started, but well worth it. Okay, so get yourself all organised there like that. Now I like to just get my first bit ironed together like that, and then I'm just going to work along like this. So just a little bit at a time, and you can see how that tape is just going nicely in the middle there like that. So I'll just hold that little bit up there and show you my tape's ironed on there like that, and then when you're ready to apply your tape you can just peel the fusible tape away. Now as I said, you can, if you want to, make it up first like this and then iron your tape onto it. When you're ironing the tape on, make sure that you just use the iron on the medium setting, and there's no need to press really hard. Sometimes when you're making bias, if you press too hard you're actually stretching the strip, so it's becoming narrower as you're working with it. So I've got a sample now to show you how I have applied the bias. Now I've got some strips that I made up earlier, and they've got the fusible tape on them there like that. And just to show you how this works, first of all I've cut my end straight like this, and I've peeled up where I've already ironed on. I've already started here, so just to show you where I've started down here, and I've come up, I've made a little mitre, and then I've come around and I have finished my raw end underneath the strip that is covering there. So all I have to do is just lift that up a little bit there like that. So that raw end's going to be covered, and just ironing along. Now I'm making sure that my strip is going to be sitting 1/4 inch over the edge of my applique fabric there like that. So I've got 1/4 inch on the applique fabric and 1/4 inch on the background fabric. So I'm ironing around like that. Just need to turn your work around, and I'll just remove the rest of the paper there. And I'm going to show you an easy way to make a mitre. So as you come up to the end, so iron all the way to the corner, and then you use a pin, and because I want my bias to be sitting 1/4 inch over the edge, I'm going to pop my pin in the direction of the next angle with the pin extending 1/4 inch past the end of my petal there. Then you just bend around like that. I'll show that again. So there's my pin, and I'm just bringing the fabric around like that. And then you can just continue ironing. And because the fabric has been cut on the bias grain, that's why we're able to get that lovely curve around the edge there. Now when I come to this edge here, I'm going to cut my bias tape there, and I'll just show you there, cutting that so it's going to finish underneath this strip here in the middle, so my raw end is nice and secure. So I'm just peeling that up there slightly like that. There we are. I'll get the other side peeled up, ready to go too. And just finish ironing that little bit down there. So to continue on, I would just tuck my next strip underneath this one here, and then I'm coming along my square, around my petal, back around, and tucking that edge under there, and then continuing on to finish my next one. Now to sew your bias on, there's lots of different ways. You can sew on by hand, so a nice little invisible applique stitch on the edge there, or you can use an invisible machine sewn applique stitch. So that's sometimes what I like to do. I use an invisible thread and a little tiny zigzag on the edge of that. Or with this particular design here, what I've done is I've actually put it together with the batting and the backing, and I've machine sewn nice and close around either edge of the bias there. So I've basically applied my bias, so I've attached it and I'm quilting it at the same time. So lots and lots of different ways that you can use bias.